long sometimes. No, but it went. Okay, perfect. So chapter 32. So just a brief synopsis. Chapter 32 comes on the heels of the chapters we learned before, in which we realize, or hopefully we've internalized what it said in the Tanya, what the Tanya says, that even by a Beinoni where on the average day, what's felt the most might be the body and the animal soul, but conceptually and the Beinoni can realize that really in not just the perfect world, but in a world in which he strives to live, his godly soul is really the most important thing in him, or his essence really is his godly soul. And if that's the case, if he can manage to boil down everything to the godly soul and sort of lose focus of the body and the animal soul, at that point, if he can manage to achieve that, then he's constantly happy. He has the simcha, right? He has joy. He doesn't have negative feelings bogging him down, because all negative feelings stem from the body and the animal soul. And then Alter Rebbe introduces chapter 32, in which there's another symptom, so to speak, of making the soul primary and the body secondary. What's this side effect? The side effect is that now you can truly love someone else like you love yourself. Because why do you love yourself? If the body and the animal soul are not part of the equation, you love it because you're part of God. You have a godly soul. The person sitting next to me also has a godly soul, and for all I know, it may even be of a higher level than mine, because there's no indication that at least the same thing like me. So the same way I love my godly soul, I love his godly soul, because it's all the other. It's not about me. It's all God. It's all divine focused and not myself focused. So, but that's the only way it's possible. As long as my body is even in my peripheral vision, then I'm already distracted with self, and it's not possible anymore to love someone else like myself. So the only way it's possible to do this mitzvah is if the body becomes secondary and the soul is primary. And that's, again, why Hillel said that what's the whole Torah? Don't do unto others what you want done to you, and the rest is commentary. Really? Every mitzvah is commentary to love your fellow? Putting on tefillin is commentary to love your fellow? Yeah. Why? Because why do I put on tefillin with joy and with alacrity and with zest? Because my body isn't important. If my body was important, I'd be lazy, I would be wary, I wouldn't do it every day, I wouldn't do it wholeheartedly. When can I do a mitzvah properly? When my body isn't in focus, when only my soul is in focus. And that's a result. And to love your fellow as yourself can only be done that way. You see, I could put on tefillin even if I don't, even if my body's in focus. I could force myself to put on tefillin even if I don't want to, even if I'm not in the mood. I can't love you like I love myself if I'm not truly focused on soul. I could say I love you. I could act as if I love you. But the only way I actually care about you, the way I care about myself, is if my body isn't in play. Every other mitzvah, although the best way to do the mitzvah, or the ultimate, is from a soul perspective, and the body shouldn't be in play. But every other mitzvah you could keep Shabbos, you could pray, you could give charity, even if your heart isn't into it. You can't love someone else if your heart isn't into it. And so that's why Hillel said, you want to do the whole Torah? First, make your body secondary and your soul primary, which is the foundation of the mitzvah of love your fellow. If you can do that, the rest of the Torah is easy. Because what's stopping us from doing any mitzvah today? Body calculations. I live too far from a kosher store. I live too far from a shul. I live too far. These are all body calculations because I'm worried about the inconvenience in places on my body. Any objection any person has to any mitzvah, or even if I'm going to do the mitzvah, I'm going to put on tefillin today, but I just can't do it now. Why? Because there's a body calculation. If the body wasn't involved, I would do the mitzvah right away. Yeah. So if you want to get to a place where keeping mitzvahs will be natural, work on making your body secondary. Now, for a Jew, they don't have to wait for that because you already have to do the mitzvahs. You can't wait for that. But for someone who wants to convert, for this person that came to Hillel to convert, Hillel says, you want to learn the whole Torah? Fine. It's very easy. If you can make body secondary, soul primary, the whole Torah will be simple. And you see this even in yourself. You wake up one morning and for whatever reason this day, God is at the forefront, or you feel extra spirit, you feel your soul. There's something different. You may come to class with alacrity. You may not. You may do things much easier because your body isn't in focus. It may not be 24/7, but you come to shul on Rosh Hashanah and you get inspired, and suddenly for the next hour you find yourself focusing. You don't even realize. An hour later you look up and you go, wait, an hour passed, and I focused on davening till now. What happened? Your body wasn't in focus. Okay. Till here, all is good. And this is where we left off. We started talking about this last time, that because every Jew has a soul, you can love every Jew. However, practically speaking, how easy is it to love someone who stole something from you, who hurt you, who, God forbid, killed someone, even if they have a soul? How can you love them? And to say that you love them in a way almost diminishes, it's not condoning what they did, but it almost diminishes the severity of what they did. I loved you yesterday, and although you, God forbid, this guy killed someone, I still love him. I love him the same. Really? How does that work? And as we'll see later, the Talmud says there are times where you're obligated to hate someone because of these terrible things that a person can do. So how can we say you have to love every person when it's not really every person?
But I thought you were never supposed to hate anybody.
Oh, so we'll talk soon at the end of the chapter when it is appropriate. But we do know that the Torah says that if you see the donkey of your enemy struggling under its
You're
load,
supposed to fix it.
right? But why do you have an enemy?
Ah,
In other words, the Torah is, although the Torah might just be speaking to humans who, although the Torah wants us not to have enemies, knows that we will, but the Torah is the mitzvahs even to a tzaddik, even to someone who has no enemies. So how can someone who loves every Jew like himself have enemies? So the Talmud says there are times where you're supposed to hate someone. For example, no, a Jew.
Oh, okay.
For example, someone that there are certain sins a person can commit, or not individual sin, but certain places a person can get to, that someone desecrates God's name in public, or certain severe things a person can do, or certain levels a person can stoop to because they do something repetitively or openly or etc., that can legitimately cause the halacha to say this person. Now, this is what it seems like. Obviously, it seems to contradict love every person. So we'll have to see how to make those two connect. But the question is, how do we get over this hump of loving someone that seemingly in a just society should be locked up and despised? Yeah. So if you look in the Talmud that discusses this concept of hating evil, so there are a few qualifications that a person needs to meet in order to hate someone that's evil. I don't know the right word to use. Evil. Let's use the word evil. A person's evil, yeah. So, but evil doesn't just include evil between man and his fellow. Evil includes someone who desecrates God's name. That's not the evil between. So that would also be included in this. Okay, so let's say, so the first qualification is, it says, your brother. You should not hate your brother in your heart. Yeah, so it has to be your brother. What does a brother mean? A brother doesn't mean a biological sibling. A brother doesn't even mean a fellow male. What is a brother? When the Torah says brother, what does it imply? The Torah uses the term brother a number of times and not referring to biological relationships. So, but why does it say, well, why not reyacha? Reyacha, achicha. So reyacha also implies a relation, like a friendly relationship, but achicha is brother. That's like, so the Talmud explains that it means someone who is like biological. In other words, someone who's on the same level as you in Torah and mitzvahs. So in other words, if I'm a super religious person, the only time, so the first qualification is if I see a sinner, when am I allowed to hate him? The first qualification is he has to be on my level. He has to be my brother. Someone who is not on my level, in other words, someone who's not as religious as I am, for whatever reason, I can't hate them because I don't know why. Now, you'll say if the person's religious, how could he be evil? Yeah, we're talking about someone who is a religious person and yet perform sins, and generally speaking, portrays himself as a religious person or tries to be a religious person and sins. Yeah. So it says that if a student, in general, you know how you say a sage in Hebrew, or a rabbi. Yeah, but the Talmud doesn't usually refer to it as a chacham. You're right. The word chacham means wise, but how is a person who is wise usually referred to? Talmud chacham. What does Talmud mean? Student of the wise. Every wise person is called a student of the wise. In the Talmud doesn't usually refer to individuals as wise. They're the student of the wise. Why? Because you have to constantly be nurturing. It's not enough to once have learned. You have to constantly be studying, be a student. Yeah. So it says if a Talmud Chacham sins, even if he does it by mistake, it's considered as if he did it on purpose. Because it was expected of him to be more careful. What do you mean you did it by mistake? You forgot it was Shabbos, or you forgot you weren't allowed to do this. How can you be so absent-minded when it comes to Torah? But if an ignoramus, in other words, someone who's not familiar, doesn't study Torah, and doesn't know the details of the Torah, again, ignoramus doesn't mean he's stupid. It means someone who's not familiar, doesn't know the Torah. If he sins willingly, in other words, he commits a transgression, but he doesn't know there's something wrong with it. So it's not considered a willing transgression. It's considered, it's as if he did it by mistake. So if a rabbi commits a sin by mistake, it's considered as if he did it on purpose. If someone who is uneducated commits a sin on purpose, again, he didn't try to violate the sin. He didn't know there was something wrong with a cheeseburger. Yeah, he thought Jews don't eat pork. He didn't know Jews don't eat shellfish, and he ate shellfish. He did it on purpose. He ate the shellfish, but he had no idea there was a problem, or even if he did know it was a problem. But that's not how he was raised. That wasn't his environment. So he doesn't realize the severity of what he did. So it's not considered as if he did it on purpose. It's considered as if he did it by mistake. So now, if person A is a Talmud Chacham, yeah, and he sees someone who's uneducated committing a sin, even if he does it on purpose, how could he hate him if he doesn't know what level that person might be on? Yeah. So the first justification you can have, no matter how big of a sinner it is, the first justification the first qualification you need to meet in order to be able to hate that person is by knowing his true status. Because you have to know him personally and intimately, and knowing that he's on your level. That's the first thing. The second thing is, the Torah says before you hate him, you have to rebuke him. In other words, you have to prove that this is something that the person is doing willingly and voluntarily, and he's not willing to stop. You have to rebuke him. In other words, you have to remind him how severe it is and try to talk him down. And if he still continues, okay, then you've met qualification number 2, because now you know for sure he's sinning on purpose. And you know he's on your level, so that's pretty harsh. And number 3 is if he's not just you know him intimately, but you're very close to him, because we know that Maimonides explains how to do the mitzvah of rebuke. rebuking someone for sinning is one of the 613 commandments. But it can only be done if it's done in a loving way. Because if it's done in a hateful way, or if it's done in a resentful way, or if it's done in a top-down approach, most people don't respond to that. So you can't expect the person to respond to rebuke if it doesn't come from a loving place. So in other words, the only time you can justify hating someone, and we'll soon see the Alter Rebbe is going to even diminish it even further. But whenever the Torah seems to imply that there's a Jew you're allowed to hate, they have to meet 3 qualifications. They have to be on your level. You have to know them intimately and personally enough to know that what they're doing, they shouldn't be doing. In other words, they can do better than that. You have to love them enough to rebuke them in the appropriate manner, and they still don't bend. Then you can hate them. Okay? But for the average person, you don't have more than one person in your life that meets that qualification. Even that many people don't have.
But does that mean then you can never hate a Christian?
Well, we're not dealing with non-Jews.
Okay.
Yeah, in other words, why would you hate anyone if they do something wrong?
Right.
Okay, so there's no prohibition against hating someone who isn't Jewish. The Torah speaks about the downsides of hate in general, but you don't violate a biblical prohibition when you hate someone you violate a biblical prohibition when you hate someone who is Jewish. Like, for example, interest. Yeah, there's a biblical prohibition against lending or borrowing from a Jew with interest. Biblical prohibition, but it's a mitzvah to lend to a non-Jew with interest. Why? Why? Because that's how you do business. In other words, the novelty isn't that I'm allowed to lend to a non-Jew with interest. Everyone does that. That's just normal world. The novelty is I can't lend to a Jew. The novelty isn't. The novelty is that I'm forbidden from hating a Jew, even if I have every reason in the book to do it. But if there's a justifiable reason to hate, and what does it mean to hate? You even have to get into that. What does it mean to hate? When you say you're allowed to hate, is it a prohibition? What does it mean to hate the Christian or the individual that you're hating? What are you hating about them? Or what is it that you're hating? They committed a terrible crime. So what do you hate?
The crime.
The crime. Okay, so we'll soon see that's where we're going to get to. And if we can figure out a way in our own minds to separate the person from the act. Now, that doesn't mean you have to let the person go free from jail, because that person can commit the same act. Yeah, but if you can manage to hate the crime and not the offender, if you can get there, then you never hate anyone. You hate evil, but the person himself isn't evil. The person did an evil act. Now, it could be there are people that do so many evil acts that although they still retain some sense, they still retain their humanity, the chances of them revealing that are slim to none. And therefore, what are you loving? Yeah, that person usually doesn't end up in the streets and doesn't end up alive. Yeah? Someone who truly lost every sense of their humanity. But most people don't. Even vicious, even the wicked of the wicked. Yeah, even the serial killer had a family who loves him, who thinks he was the best father in the world. Yeah. In other words, that doesn't mean that the victim or the average person has to go and shower him with gifts and love him. Loving here doesn't mean they have to be your best friends. You understand? Loving someone doesn't mean you have to go out of your way to make their life. Loving means that you don't carry negative feelings towards them. When you see them and you see them in a time of need and you can give a hand, why would you not? Unless it's dangerous, obviously. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the feeling in your heart. Why would you need that hateful feeling in your heart to avoid contact with them or anything else? Now, there's no mitzvah to love every non-Jew in the world, and that's very simple. You can't tell someone to love someone. How can you tell a Jew to love another Jew?
Or to love God.
Or to love God. How can you do that? Because the Jew has the divine soul. The Jew has an element to him in which naturally it loves every Jew and it loves God. So the commandment to the person is, don't think about your body for a few minutes and then that love will express itself. But you're right, if the person had to create this love, how can you command someone to love? Makes no sense. So I can tell you got to love your brother or your sister. I can't tell you love your classmates, but I can tell you love your parents. Well, there are situations in which it's hard to command someone, but you understand that there's a difference between commanding someone to love their sibling and love their neighbor. There's a big difference. So there could be a mitzvah to love every Jew. There can't be a mitzvah to love every non-Jew because there isn't that divine soul that makes us one. So how could you command someone to love? Now, does that mean you're not allowed to love everyone? Go ahead. If you can get yourself to a place where you see the divine spark, even in the non, because the non-Jew has a divine soul, it's just not the same DNA. So it's not the same biological DNA, so to speak, as the Jew. So you can't command. But if a person can see the spark of God in the coffee cup, and therefore he respects the coffee cup and he's not going to destroy it, and he sees the divine soul in the animal, he sees the divine soul in the food. That's the ultimate level where you see the divine soul in everything. And the non-Jew has a soul, has a human soul that comes from God. If you can manage to strip away everything else and see that, by all means. But you can't command that. You understand? Okay, but we're specifically talking about Jews because that's what the Tanya is written for. It's written that's what the mitzvah is. That's what the Torah is speaking to. Okay, so is it possible to love every Jew, even someone that's an offender? Yeah, it's possible. The only justification you have not to love him is, okay, how it's possible we'll soon see. But by saying you have to love the felon, that does not mean that you're diminishing the severity of what they did, because you don't know why they did it. You don't know the circumstances unless you know they're on your level and you know they could have done better. You know that they're really capable, and they did it anyway out of spite. Then you have a reason to hate them, but that only in that case, and you have to prove it. But otherwise, you don't know why the person drove on Shabbos. They may not be aware, or even if they're aware, it may be too big of a struggle. You don't know why. So how could you hate them? Okay. Let's look here. By the way, you know that we'll continue inside. We're at the bottom of 436. We're going to continue here. It's the very end here. That's basically what we spoke about Torah.
So that's the 10 Adar 20.
Yeah. But before we get there, just another passage of Hillel. You know, we just read this week in Ethics of Our Fathers. Hillel, what did Hillel say? Remember what Hillel said in chapter 1 of Ethics of Our Fathers? Be of the students of Aaron. What was Aaron? What?
Priest.
Yeah, but I'm saying what does it be a student of? It means adopt his teaching. What was Aaron's teaching that we should be a student of?
The peacemaker.
Oh, it says that he loved creations, ohev et habriot, loved the creations, umekarvan la Torah, and he brought them close to Torah. Now, why would you refer to people as creations? So the commentaries say because the novelty of Aaron was he loved people that their only quality was that they were creations. In other words, there was nothing good about them. There wasn't even anything human about them. What was their whole quality of what was their contribution to the world? The fact that God created them. They contributed nothing. They were here because they were a creation of God. Aaron loved them too. And what did he do? He brought them close to Torah. He didn't try to change the Torah to adapt the Torah to them. He loved them so much that he was able to bring them and lead them towards the Torah. This is Hillel's, right? This is Hillel's method here. Hillel's method is if you can make your body secondary and your soul primary, you can love someone that's not even human. He's just a creation. In other words, he's lacking his humanity. He's just a creation. You could love him too, and you can bring him close to Torah. Because he experiences and sees that you love him. Okay, let's look inside here, the bottom of 436. As for the Talmudic statement that if one sees his friend sinning, he should hate him and should also relate the fact to his teacher so that he too will hate him. How does this conform with what was said above? So the Alter Rebbe explains that this applies only to one's companion. In other words, one's equal in the study of Torah and the observance of mitzvahs. That's the first qualification. Qualification number 2, he has also fulfilled with him, in other words, with the sinner, the injunction, you shall repeatedly rebuke your friend. And the word used here for your friend, amitecha, also indicates, as the Talmud points out, am she'itcha, he who is on par with you in the Torah and the mitzvahs. In other words, who can you rebuke? Only someone who's on your level, who nevertheless has not repented of his sin, as it is written in Sefer Haredim. In other words, so implied in this is the other qualification that you have to do it in a loving way. In other words, you have to love him. Because if you don't do it in a loving way, that's not rebuke. Rebuke has to be something that could be heard. When you yell at someone or you rebuke someone from a place of anger or frustration, that's not words that could be heard. Those go in one ear, out the other ear, if they even go in. Usually they bounce off. Yeah, when a spouse gets upset at their spouse and yells something, either they don't hear it or it goes in one, yeah, or it creates friction. But it doesn't. You don't change because of it. You don't suddenly become the person who takes out the garbage on time or when she wants to because she yelled at you. That's not how you get something done. So the same thing here. So it has to be your equal. You have to have fulfilled the mitzvah of rebuke, again in a loving way. Then you can hate him. But as to one who is not his companion, his equal in the Torah and the mitzvahs, so that as our sages say concerning the ignorant in general, even his deliberate transgressions are regarded as inadvertent acts, since he is unaware of the gravity of the sin, nor is he on intimate terms with him. In other words, not only is one not enjoined to hate him, on the contrary, he must in fact strive to become closer to him, as the Alter Rebbe states shortly. Yeah. So let's say you meet someone who looks like a sinner, but he's not on your level. He may not be aware of the severity of sin. How do you treat them? So we know, on the contrary, therefore, of this situation, Hillel said, be one of the disciples of Aaron, loving peace and pursuing peace, loving creatures and drawing them near to the Torah. And this usage of the term creatures in reference to human beings, which seems like a derogatory term, means that even those who are far from God's Torah and his service, for which reason they are classified simply as creatures, indicating that the fact that they are God's creations is their sole virtue, even those one must attract with strong love cords of love. Why? Because perhaps through the love, thereby one will be able, after all, to draw them close to the Torah and the service of God. So this person you're not allowed to hate because maybe you could bring him close. Now let's say you love on the guy for 50 years and you never bring him an inch closer to God. Was that love unjustified now? Because we're saying the love is justified because you may bring him closer. So Alter Rebbe says no. And even if one fails in this, in other words, he has loved the sinner and has not managed to bring him an inch closer, he has not forfeited the merit of the mitzvah of neighborly love, which he has fulfilled by his efforts in this direction. In other words, you spent your life loving the sinner. You haven't done anything wrong, even if you did. Even if your objective may be to correct his ways, even if you were 0% successful. First of all, there's no way to know that, and it's almost impossible to be 0%. But even if you were, objectively speaking, you failed miserably. You still did the mitzvah of loving your fellow as yourself for 50 years or however long. Why should that be diminished? So nothing wrong was done. On the contrary, you could perform the mitzvah. Yeah.
So on page 437,
Yeah.
it talks about that you hate this friend who's sinning, and you should also relate that fact to his teacher.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do you make the distinction between telling the teacher and it being gossip?
Like we said yesterday.
Because last night we were talking about gossip.
Yeah, very good. So we qualify.
Don't be a tattletale.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So we qualified gossip yesterday by saying gossip can be permitted under certain situations in which it can be detrimental to others. Yeah, in which someone else's life can be in danger, or in which it can affect someone else severely. Then now, what we have to I have to give you a little background on what this means to tell the teacher. I mean, what does it mean tell your teacher?
Because it goes on to say so that he too will hate.
But why? Why is it important that the teacher too hates him? Well, who's going to be hurt if no one knows this guy's a sinner? Let's say the guy's a sinner and only you know. Who's going to be affected by it? Oh, So that's not the case. If no one will be affected, then you're not allowed to tell the teacher. But you have to understand like this. We're talking about someone that has a teacher. In other words, and we have to divorce ourselves a little bit of the way we see the world today. You have to either try to go back in history and see how things used to be, or even in religious communities today, it's like this. But when you have, let's say, a rabbi, a well-known rabbi within a community, okay, and this rabbi is well respected, he has students or disciples that are around him all the time that receive from him. As the rabbi gets older, a lot of times you can't ask the rabbi all the questions. You'll ask his disciples because they know they've been around him, they know how he thinks, they know what he's said in the past, etc. What gives these disciples legitimacy? The way the rabbi treats them. In other words, when you see the rabbi bringing one person close to him and always surrounding himself with him, now you know the rabbi trusts this guy. Let's say there's a disciple and one day the rabbi kicks him out of the house. Now you know something happened, that the rabbi doesn't trust him. So now you're not going to go ask him your questions because something's there, right? So we're talking about here where if you let this person who you know to be a sinner continue to masquerade himself as a religious person, and the teacher doesn't know, and the teacher continues to put his trust in him, you may bring tremendous damage in the long term to many people. So if this person who you see sin and you rebuke him and you see he's not leaving his ways, he's going to remain this way, then you have to tell the teacher, otherwise other people can be affected in the negative because of it. But yeah,
people who in turn are going to be hurt.
Exactly. But if you see a guy sinning, you don't have to go to his rabbi from his congregation and tell him, oh, you know this guy that's a member in your shul, you should know what terrible guy he is. Now, obviously, if the guy committed a sin that's dangerous for other people, you have to tell him, like we said yesterday. But here we're talking about even if he commits a sin that's not interpersonal. The guy eats pork once a week. And he does it in private at home. There's no harm, so to speak, that can come to others. Let the guy continue his persona. What's the problem? Yeah, but if the persona is that he's a student of a rabbi, then that's a status symbol. And that status symbol could be hurtful to others in the long run because he could influence others also to leave the path of Torah potentially, or other such things. Okay, so it's a little contextual. That's in a specific context. If you encounter such a case, not necessarily you have to go tell their family and friends of their status. Yeah. Okay, so now we know you have to love every Jew, even a sinner you have to love, unless he falls into this very, very unlikely category of the 1% of people that you know, and most of them probably don't fall into this category, then potentially there's a permission slip or even an obligation to hate them from the Torah. But now the Alter Rebbe is going to qualify that even further. Furthermore, this is 28 Adar 1. Yeah. Furthermore, even those whom one is enjoined to hate, why? For they are close to him, and he has rebuked them, but they still have not repented of their sins. One is obliged to love him too. In other words, you have to hate him and love him at the same time. Even though there's a commandment to hate him, there's still a commandment to love him. And both the love and the hatred are truthful emotions in this case. Imagine, since when you have someone who's your friend, he's on your level, and you see him sin and you hate him. Why do you hate him? You hate everything about him, or you hate the fact that he's sinning? You don't suddenly not like studying with him or spending time with him or doing the mitzvahs he does do, right? You love the guy. So both are true, since the hatred is on account of the evil within them, while the love is on account of the good hidden in them, which is the divine spark within them that animates their divine soul. For this spark of godliness is present even in the most wicked of one's fellow Jews. It is merely hidden.
So you have to love everybody, and you can still hate somebody, but you have to love everybody doesn't go away.
Correct. Okay, 1 second. You know, the famous story of, we said I don't know if you remember last time we spoke about one of the students of the colleagues of the Alter Rebbe, Reb Zusha, that didn't see bad in another Jew, right? His teacher blessed him; he should never see bad in another Jew, because he once judged someone who came to speak to his teacher, and he said, "How can you come here?" And he left, and he wasn't able to fix that. So he never saw bad in another Jew. There was another colleague of the Alter Rebbe, his name was Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev, which again we've mentioned a number of times. And he has similar stories in which he did see bad, but he always found a good twist. So for example, he once saw a Jew who was wearing his talis and tefillin, davening, fixing the wheel of his wagon. There was a big commotion in heaven. How could a Jew during davening be fixing his wheel? He should be focusing on the davening. He's wearing tefillin, he's doing a mitzvah. Rabbi Yitzchak said, how great is this Jew that even when he fixes his wheels, he wears tefillin and davens. Yeah? Or another story, he once saw a Jew smoking on Shabbos. So he asked him, did you forget it's Shabbos today? He said, no. Did you forget you're not allowed to smoke today? He says, no. He turns to heaven, he says, you see, God, even the sinners among you can't say a lie. Yeah? In other words, if you remember the analogy we gave at the beginning, when you see when the person is commissioned to paint the painting of the prince, who part of his face is deformed, right? So one painter paints a perfect face, right? He fixes the blemishes. He doesn't see the bad. The other painter figures out a way to hide the blemishes. So he paints the side portrait, side portfolio, yeah? But Alter Rebbe wants to take it a step further. Alter Rebbe is saying that even the person who you have to hate, you have to love them. In other words, Rabbi Yitzchak Barditchev was trying to find ways to love the person, to hide the reasons, yeah, to say you don't have to hate him because look how good he is. Alter Rebbe is saying even the person who, at the end of the day, the Torah says you have to hate him. Even that 0.1% that you have to hate, you have to love them too. So there's two opposite mitzvahs happening at the same time. How do you do this? You do this by not associating the person with the negative that they do, by separating the two, by separating the person from their actions.
Love the sinner, hate the sin.
Exactly. And especially someone who is close to you, there's probably much more to love about them than to hate about them. Probably much more of what they do is lovable than hateful. Again, this is a person that was once your colleague, is on your level, was your friend, or is your friend. So we're not talking about the person that you never met in your life that's the serial killer, yeah? We're talking about the person who's on your level, who's your friend. There's a lot to love about them. It all doesn't all go out the window. But there's another way to love a person that you see something despicable about them, and that is by utilizing the attribute of mercy. In other words, what's mercy? Mercy includes both opposites at the same time. When you have mercy on someone, what are you in essence saying? You're saying, I acknowledge this person has something bad. In other words, I acknowledge there might be if I give someone who earned $100, if I give them $100, is that merciful? No. Merciful is giving someone who didn't earn the $100. That's mercy, right? In other words, mercy means you see someone that isn't deserving, that doesn't deserve it, but they also have something that does deserve it. If they truly don't deserve it, you're not going to give them $100. Who do you have mercy on? You don't have mercy on the table, yeah? Unless it's useful to you. You have mercy on the person or on the thing that has good in it. Still doesn't deserve what you're about to give them, but you have mercy in that you recognize what happened there, that there's an imbalance. But it doesn't mean that it all went one way or the other. Okay, so now let's look here at the bottom of 440. So the first thing we said was that even those who are close to you, you have to love them and hate them. Now the Alter Rebbe is going to say, not only do you have to love them and hate them, you have to do something even more. One must also arouse compassion on the divine soul of the sinner. For in the case of the wicked, it is in exile within the evil of the Sitra Achra, which dominates it. Right? The Jews, the sinner, still has a godly soul. Could you imagine how much pain that godly soul is in? That it can't express itself the way it wants to? Because for a godly soul to express itself, it would perform every mitzvah, it would study Torah all day, it would just be one with God. So any moment that the godly soul isn't expressing itself, it's being suppressed. Isn't it a pity on the godly soul that it's being suppressed like that? And this compassion banishes the hatred. So you have to start off hating the evil. But what happens when you see the evil and you realize how bad the evil is? Now you start filling with a feeling of compassion. And once you have compassion, you can't hate the person anymore. You can't even hate the evil anymore. In other words, you can't even hate anything about the person. You just have compassion on their soul. Compassion banishes the hatred and arouses love, as is known from the verse, Jacob who redeemed Abraham. Right? Abraham was a 100% kindness and love, and he had Yishmael. Right? He loved everyone, even Yishmael, and he couldn't get Yishmael on the right path. Yitzchak took the opposite approach. He took the harsh approach, but he pushed away Esav with it. He couldn't get Esav to come close. Jacob, all his 12 children followed this path because Jacob represents mercy. In other words, Jacob didn't deny the negative in the other, but tried to arouse his level of compassion. So Jacob fixed Abraham. In other words, Abraham was perfect kindness, but perfect kindness, 100% kindness, could be bad, right? When you're kind to when the potential murderer comes to you and asks you to borrow your gun and you're kind to him, that's not kindness, right? It feels like kindness. It's an expression of kindness, but ultimately it's not. So Jacob has to balance out Abraham. Jacob redeems Abraham by introducing compassion. Abraham doesn't see the bad. Jacob sees the bad, but turns it into a feeling of compassion to try to help the person. Okay. So bottom line, even for the 0.001% of people that have 0.001% of their people they know that might fall into this category of hate, together with the hate, you have to love them, and then you have to arouse the feeling of compassion towards them to try to bring them back. So basically, practically speaking, there's no one that you're justified to hate. Because if they're not on your level, how can you judge them? And if they are, if you could judge them, how can you hate them? They still have so much good. Now, as for the state, this is a brackets. The Alter Rebbe adds something on a side note here. Okay, if you have to love every Jew, even the Jew that you have to hate, you have to love them too. King David has a statement here that seems to imply that not necessarily that you can love someone to the extreme where there's nothing to, you can hate someone to the extreme where there's nothing to love about them. As for the statement by King David, peace upon him, I hate them with a consummated hatred. Consummated hatred means that it's all encompassing. It takes over the whole thing. There's nothing lovable there. Reserving no love for them whatsoever. So this refers only to Jewish heretics and atheists who have no part in the God of Israel. As stated in the Talmud, beginning of chapter 16 of Tractate Shabbos. This is not talking about the modern day atheist who claims to be an atheist. In order to be an atheist, in other words, an atheist halachically, in order to be someone who is considered a heretic or an atheist, you have to know you can't just be choosing another path because you don't know the path of God. You have to know the path of God and deny it and choose something else. So there was once in the 1800s, there was from one of the early from the Reform movement. They were called the Maskilim, the Enlightened. So one of them came to the third Lubavitcher Rebbe and he introduced himself as a heretic. And he said, I have questions. And he asked him questions, and Tzemach Tzedek looked at him and said, you're not a heretic. You're an ignoramus. You don't know enough to be a heretic. To be a heretic, you have to know everything. Because if there's something you don't know, then who knows if that would be the thing to change your mind. And then you're not a real heretic. In other words, when we say atheist, we're saying not someone who doesn't believe there's a God. We're saying someone who actively denies God. But if you don't know everything there is to know, how do you know you actively deny it? You don't know what there is to deny, so you can't deny it. So here when we say atheist, we mean someone who denies 100% of Judaism. How do you do that? If you know 100% of Judaism, then you could deny it. Okay? So the Talmud says that there are certain people, it mentions names of a few people that have no place in the world to come. The commentaries discuss whether that means even when Mashiach comes or only and now at this time, but there could be a potential possibility of a great sage. In other words, someone who studied everything and knows everything and lived the life. In other words, is expected to be on that level, and then he goes and denies everything. That's a person, King David says, there's nothing there, there's nothing left there. He denied everything. He's not a sinner, he commits one sin. The atheist is someone who denies everything. Deny everything, there's nothing left. In other words, this person that used to be your friend got rid of everything that made you compatible, everything that was shared between you. Then there's nothing to love anymore. Now, even though they technically still have their godly soul, every Jew has a godly soul. So there are certain cases in which it's possible for a person to denounce his godly soul or deny his godly soul, which, again, whether that actually accomplishes it or not is questionable, but from their perspective, it does. In other words, from the person's perspective, they're announcing, I don't have a godly soul anymore. If you announce you don't have a godly soul anymore, I have nothing to love. Yeah. The problem, not the problem, the qualification for this is, today this doesn't exist. You know, it's very rare. Even in historical times, it almost didn't exist such a person that can rise to such a level. You have to have someone who starts off on the top of the top. In other words, knows everything and does everything, and then ends up at the bottom of the bottom. That's very rare to find. It was very rare to find someone who was on the top that went to the bottom. You have people that were on the top that went down a bit. You have people that were in the middle that went to the bottom. But to find someone on the top that went to the bottom is almost unheard of. In Judaism, there have been select few, but almost unheard of. Right? There was a high priest for 80 years and then left everything. But it doesn't say, it says he became a tzedukah. What's a tzedukah? A Sadducee. Sadducees believed in God and the Torah. They just rejected the rabbis. So he doesn't qualify for this because he's not rejecting Torah. So it's very rare to find someone that's on the top. No, that's on the top. I'm using the metaphor of the top. But that knows everything and does everything and goes to the bottom, that denies everything and rejects everything. Again, it's honor. Doesn't really. But King David says such a person, them I would totally reject. Because again, they're giving up their citizenship. Whether that works or not depends. Some countries you can get a citizenship, some countries you can't. But if the person says, I'm giving up my citizenship, even if he can't technically, the country may be able to treat him as if he's not. Because from his perspective, he did. But one second, I just want to conclude because we want to conclude the chapter. In other words, this is the foundation Alter Rebbe put for Chabad Hasidus for all generations. In other words, the Baal Shem Tov in general introduced the absolute simplistic but actual interpretation of love your fellow as yourself. Don't bring any interpretation or anything. It means to love your fellow as yourself. Okay. Up until that point, there were many outliers, too many outliers, where there were reasons not to love someone else. The Baal Shem Tov made this a focal point. So Hasidus in general focused on love of a fellow. And as we saw throughout the generations, the Maggid took it a step further. You have to love sinners. You have to love, took it further and further. The Alter Rebbe took it to the extreme. Alter Rebbe took it to the extreme that basically gives you no right to hate anyone. And even someone you do have a right to hate, it's a temporary hate combined with love that ultimately leads to mercy, that leads to pure love. And this is the foundation on which Chabad Hasidus was built in the Tanya. And throughout the generations, the Chabad Rebbe is always focused on this. The Rebbe took it again to an extreme. But in our time, where it became even more necessary than in previous times. Because in previous times, there was an element of spite amongst those who were non-religious. Because they were leaving religion. There's not, again, such a person, although you have to love them, but there's not many ways to express that because they're running away from you. They're trying to reject you. So it wasn't really, although whenever some of those people, non-religious people who were anti-religious, they weren't non-religious, they were anti-religious, they still were Jewish, they still proudly Jewish, and they would still be, there were many activists for the Jewish cause in Russia and in Europe that were anti-religious, but the Chabad Rebbes always worked very close to them. They always had found things to say about the Chabad Rebbes, but there was little the Rebbes or the Hasidim could do to bring them close because they were actively running away. When the previous Rebbe came to America, this was the first time where you were able to really employ this on a more broad level and embody the teachings of the Alter Rebbe here. And to the extreme the Alter Rebbe takes it, we don't see it as an extreme, but in history and in Jewish literature, this is to the extreme. And thank God we see the results. And again, even if there's no results, we follow the mitzvah of loving your fellow as yourself. It doesn't have to be results. I could live here for 20 years and no one could do any mitzvahs and I'd still be happy. But I'd be happier if everyone did some mitzvahs too. Not because there's unhappiness in doing the mitzvah of loving fellow, but because every mitzvah you do increases in joy. So that's just happier. But it's not it's lacking anything. All right, let's. So next week we will continue with chapter 33. We're going back to joy. We never really said